Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our Friday live question and answer class, where we talk about American English pronunciation, intonation, and other topics related to American accent training to help you improve your personal and professional communication in American English. We've been talking for the last several weeks about vowel sounds versus vowel spelling. This affects many speakers of English, including native speakers sometimes, where we see the way a word is spelled and we may be mispronouncing the word based on that spelling, based on the vowel letter that we see rather than knowing the vowel sound. And in our previous two classes, we looked at the letter O and the letter A. I also have some additional videos for you on this on Facebook and on my YouTube channel page, so check those out. And today I'll be sharing some additional resources for everything related to this topic, as well as looking specifically at the letter E and the sounds it makes and the sounds it doesn't make. So letter E is an interesting one because it's often silent in some words. So we'll look at how to know and give you some tips for practicing, give you some free resources as always. And of course, as always, take your questions. So you can ask me questions about this topic or anything else that you'd like to know. If you have a word that's difficult to pronounce, if you have questions about American accent training, about American English, feel free to ask those and you can put them in the chat. If you're watching on Facebook and you have a question, you can write it in the chat on Facebook, or you can join the YouTube broadcast and put it in the chat there, and I'll be able to see that. I do go back and look for your questions and give you answers and resources after class as well. So if you're watching the rebroadcast or I don't get to your question, I will follow up with you. So thank you for being a part of class. For those of you who are new, we do meet every week here on YouTube, and I am located in Bellevue, Washington, where I teach group classes. I also do one-on-one training with clients all over the world. So wherever you are, if you're interested in finding out more about individual accent training or group classes, online classes, you can find all of that on my website, speechmodification.com. And we're going to get to the meat of the class here in just a moment. I'm giving people a little bit more time to get to attend and join class. So I'll also let you know that depending on where you are in the world, you can check out my online classes as well. So I have very inexpensive online classes that walk you through all of the steps to improve everything in your American English for the accent, for American accent. And you can check those out on speechmodification.com. All the courses have a free trial. So I hope you'll go there and check those out. So that's enough announcements. Let's get down to business and start talking about the letter E, the sounds, and the spelling for letter E. So letter E, as I said, is sometimes silent, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But what sounds does letter E usually say? So in many words, letter E says the eh sound. In fact, about 82% of the time, when you see the letter E in a stressed syllable, so that's in a single syllable word or in a multisyllabic word where the E has the stress, then it's going to say eh. I use the anchor term, the anchor words red tent for this sound, and the vowel IPA symbol is like this. So that's the sound eh, as in red tent. Some examples are words like get, men, then, when, wet, bed, etc. So that's about 82% of the time in spelling. We also, of course, have E saying the E sound. That's this symbol. And I use the anchor words green tea for that. And you'll notice that green and tea have the letter E and another letter. So typically when letter E says E, we spell it with EE or EA. There are some exceptions for single letter E's to say the sound E, like me, we, and he. The good news is typically you won't have errors on these words. You see the letter E, you say the sound E, and those are correct. For this vowel, the vowel, you may sometimes have accent error patterns. And this is simply because when you see the letter E, you may think of this sound, A. So in American English, we have A, like in the word say or day. But in American English, we don't have this sound, A. Many other languages do, and they spell it with letter E. So you might be trying to say a word with the A sound and have an accent error pattern on words like get and bed, where you might have, it might sound a little bit more like get or bed, a little too much of an A quality rather than an quality. You can find help for that accent error pattern and for pronouncing this vowel correctly on my Vowels playlist, as well as on my website, speechmodification.com, in the free resources. I will give you additional spellings for the vowels and additional help with pronunciation and error patterns for those. Today, our focus is going to be on the letter E and all of the things it does, so we aren't going to be going into as much detail about errors that you have. But I do think it's helpful to orient to the letter sounds and error patterns when you're trying to look at this, because many times, as I said, when we see a spelled letter, we make an association with a sound in our mind. And unfortunately, in American English, our spelling rules are not consistent. We don't have one letter for each sound. We have many different ways to spell sounds, and each letter can make many different sounds. So for letter E, we've talked about how it says like red tent, how it says E like me and green, and what are some other sounds that E can say. So those two you probably were aware of, mostly saying those correctly, but you probably weren't aware that letter E can also say the I sound, as in it. And so where does letter E say I? This usually happens when the letter E is an unstressed syllable, like in the words between. Obviously, I'm talking about this E, not these. This one is E, but between is how we actually pronounce that. We say I'm between two people rather than between. Similarly, words like beside and below and beyond are the I vowel sound. That's because those syllables are short and unstressed, so the vowel is reduced from an E to an I. If you say between, it's not people will still understand you, but it will be part of having an accent and sounding accented. So noticing and being aware of when the letter E says I is a useful tool. Another example would be the word enough. I don't say I have enough. I say I have enough. It's the I sound. So that's one of the sounds that letter E makes that you might not have been aware of. And then it also can be the schwa sound, which is the sound that sounds like a. And that's another case where when the letter E is in an unstressed syllable, it will be the schwa sound. So for example, in the word different or interesting, I don't say different. This E is silent, and this E is the schwa sound. It sounds like different. And similarly, interesting is an sound. Interesting. Again, as long as I'm stressing the correct syllable and making certain syllables short and others long, people will probably understand you when you say words like different and interesting, regardless of whether or not you're saying a schwa for those letter E's. But it can be useful to know about this pattern for the reduced sounds and reduced syllables, because if you make the actual E sound or the S sound for those letters, you're mispronouncing the words. And then, of course, in addition, and we noticed that different and interesting, those E sounds are silent. So there are sometimes And there's sometimes an E present in the word that makes you think you should be saying an E sound or some vowel sound, and actually we don't say those. We say different, not different. And then let's talk a little bit more about when E is silent, because that's also a very important part of understanding letter E and its influence in spelling and sounds in English. We have a question. How do I feel when somebody says between instead of between as natives? I know that people do that sometimes, including native speakers. If they're saying the word by itself, they might say between, and they're just being even across the syllables, and they see the E and they say the E. But in fluent and connected speech, it sounds more American and more fluent to be able to say between. The main and most important element is that your tween is long and clear, and your first syllable is short and reduced. So if I say between versus between, that's not a very big difference. If I say between, you can hear how that sounds less fluent. Let me give you an example. In a sentence, I might say, oh, put that between the other two. You can hear how that sounds kind of choppy. It doesn't flow well. So part of fluency when you're speaking English is having longer, clear syllables and shorter, reduced syllables. So an American would say, oh, put that between the other two, between. So they would lightly touch that first syllable. You can find out more about how syllable stress and clear and reduced sounds affect fluency in my videos about syllables. If you go to Speech Modification Seattle on YouTube, the channel page, there's a search box there. You can type in any word or phrase and find videos to relate to that. So for that, you would type in syllables and you can find videos about that. Or you can also look on my Intonation playlist and it will help you with that. Great question, thank you. Okay, so we were going to talk about when the letter E is silent, when we don't say any sound for letter E. So it can be, it's often silent at the end of the word. So for example, words like name and code, we don't say any sound for that E, but that E plays an important function in the pronunciation of these words. When I say, when I see these, so this one isn't a real word, this one is. If I have no E on COD, the word is cod. When I have the E, then the word is code. If I just saw this, if it were a real word, I would say nom, and here I would say name. And so the rule, the spelling rule for the silent E at the ends of words is it makes the letter say its name. And this isn't true every single time, but a lot of the time you'll find that if I have an E, then the A says A. And if I have an E, the O says O. Same with, for example, hid and hide. The E makes the I say I. Or for you, ton and tune. The E makes the U say ooh, tune. That one doesn't really say tune, you, but close enough. And lastly, E, mem or meme. So there the E says the E sound. So you may have learned that when you were learning to read and spell in American English. We do have some spelling rules that work. Now there's always going to be exceptions to the rules, but when you see that E, that can help clue you in that the other vowel in the word is going to be a clear vowel and is going to match the letter sound name. So that's one case where the E is silent. I see we have a question. Frederick says he has some difficulties with words like better, butter, water, and with a flap T. And he asks for some tips. Yes, so that's a great question. This is another detail that doesn't really matter for being understood, but will really help you sound more American and can make your speech more fluent when you're saying the T sound in the middle of words. So for many letter T that are between two vowel sounds in American English. We don't say water with an aspirated T, no puff of air. We use what's called the flap T, which sounds a little bit more like a D. So when I say water, I don't use that T, I say water, water. And you'll notice that the flap T is very light. So my voice is on, like with a D, but when I say a D sound, water, my tongue seals off completely and that D is strong, water. I don't want to do that when I'm trying to use a flap T. I just lightly touch my tongue up, I don't seal off the air, and then I release. So rather than water or water, that would be a T and a D, the flap T sounds like water, water. So you can try really using a light touch and just think of a D, but don't say your D very strongly. So similarly, words like little, better, butter, I'm going to just lightly touch up for that flap T. You might also, depending on your native language, have a flap in your native language. Some languages pronounce the R sound in the middle of words as a flap. So for example, the word very, if you speak an Indian English dialect of English, it'll sound like very, very. So you might investigate in your native language if the R sound is made in the front and doesn't roll, sounds more like the, very, very, then that's the same sound that you need in water, water. It's called a flap. And I call it flap T because we use it for a T in American English, but other languages use it for their R in some positions of words. So hopefully that will help you. I have quite a few videos about flap T that teach you how to say T in the middle of words, both on the words that you mentioned and additional words, as well as how to use that flap T in linking. So I would search on speechmodification.com or on my channel page, Speech Modification Seattle, type in flap T. And if you leave a comment after this video is finished, I'll also put some links there for you to get to those flap T videos. You can also type in American T and you'll find a lot of videos about that. So thank you, that's a great question. So we were talking about when the E is silent, and so very frequently the silent E is at the end of the word, but sometimes the silent E is in the middle of the word. So we talked about the word interesting, which I just mispronounced. We don't say interesting, typically we say interesting. So that E is silent. I go right from the T to the R, interesting. Similarly, in words where I add the letters ed to make something past tense, sometimes that E is silent. I don't say moved, I say moved. So really the sounds in that word are the m, the u, the v, and the d. You can see if I look at the pronunciation for moved, there's nothing there for the E. So the E is silent. That's also true for words like called. Well, I wrote it without the E. So that's how we pronounce it, with no E. We don't say called, we say called. We don't say named, we say named. And many of these you're probably pronouncing correctly, but sometimes I do hear people adding an extra sound, thinking that they need to pronounce the E in these words. And then in other past tense words, for example, needed and wanted. So past tense words that end with DED or TED, I don't say an E sound there. That's another example of where the E says I. So I say needed, wanted, or needed. I think it's more of an I than a schwa. So again, many different sounds that the letter E can make. And then, of course, there's always some exceptions in spelling in English. So how do you know what sound to produce? First of all, I suggest using my vowels playlist to understand all of the vowels of English. It will really help you orient to which words have which sounds. And then secondly, if you go to my website, you can get a free resource about vowels that I think you'll find helpful. So I'll show it to you now. So my website is speechmodification.com. And if you're on speechmodification.com and you go to the store page, you'll see all of my free downloads and resources. And so the one I'm going to highlight is this one here, American English Vowels. Right now it's free, and it will tell you all of the vowel sounds, how they are spelled most commonly, common words with those sounds, anchor words for those sounds, and the IPA symbols. So the symbols I was using to show you the vowel sounds are what are used in some online dictionaries to help you with the pronunciation. You're very welcome. Thank you for your greeting. So I also can suggest that you can use the Oxford Learner Dictionary. This is the online dictionary that I like, to check a word for what sound it has. So for example, let's go back to that word between. We were talking about how it can sound like between rather than between. And then I can look and see, it'll show me the, I accidentally clicked on an ad there. Okay, so here's my word between. And I can see that for the first E, there's an I sound. And then the second E has my E symbol. I can also listen to it. Okay, that was pretty quiet, but she said between. And then that helps me listen and develop a new filter for listening to the sounds as well. So those are two resources I recommend, as well as my vowels playlist. And I'll mention again that if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, it's a great idea to do so. It helps me and it helps you. It helps me by telling YouTube that people do want to see the content that I'm producing. They want to attend classes and get information about American accent training. And for you, if you subscribe, then when I have new videos and live classes, it will show in your home feed. And you can also even click on the bell to get some notifications for when I'm live or when I upload a new video. And so you can control how much you hear from YouTube about my channel, but it's a good way for you to give feedback that you find this to be a useful resource. So I appreciate your subscription and your attendance in class. So we've talked about 3 different letters for vowel sounds, the O, the A, and the U. As I mentioned, I recently made a video outlining details for letter O, and I'm working on ones for letter A and letter E, and those will be available soon. You can also find many lessons and much help for vowels on my website. So for example, I'm going to put in the chat a link for some simple spelling rules for American vowels. So there's many complicated things about spelling and vowels in English, but there are some consistent rules. So you might remember at the beginning that I said about 82% of the time, the letter E in a stressed syllable will say the eh vowel, like in red tent. You can look up other vowel letters and find out what they say most of the time on this resource, on this lesson, as well as on the free download I showed you from Speech Modification. So I hope you'll check those out. And when you have questions about particular words or vowel sounds or anything else related to pronunciation in American English, you can come to class, ask those questions on Fridays. You can also leave a comment on any of my videos, and I'll let you know where to find the answer. I'll give you some specific details and some help. The questions that my viewers have for me really help me create the best materials for you for your learning. So I hope you'll go ahead and do that if you have questions. Next week, we'll be back to talk more about spelling and vowels. And also next week, if you're here in the Seattle or Bellevue area, I invite you to join me at the Bellevue Tech Expo on Wednesday. I'll be there all day, and you can stop by my booth, get a free speech screening, find the latest resources for tech, for all kinds of tech in this area, and also on speechmodification.com. And you can get tickets and RSVP on my website, speechmodification.com, or on Meetup if you're on Meetup. If you're here locally, I also invite you to join my June classes. So I'm starting a 4-week class on Wednesday evenings in June. That'll be held in Bellevue. And it'll be a great class for all levels. We're going to look at some of the fundamentals of the American accent and really help you kickstart some changes and improvement in your speech. The first class is free for anyone who would like to attend, so you can check it out, see if it's a good fit for you. And so I hope you'll be joining me for that. You can find that on Speech Modification Seattle. I gave you the link. Let's see. So I have a question here. Is the short U sound like ah, or is it a different sound? That's a great question. So by short and long, sometimes when people are taught English, they're taught that vowels have a short sound and a long sound. And I typically, rather than saying short and long, will use the IPA symbols. So for the letter U, another sound we should talk about in an upcoming class, what is often referred to as the long U sounds like ooh. And so we gave the example of tune, how the silent E makes the ooh say the long U. But then U also has this sound, that's in words like put and could and book. So you can see that this sound, has a variety of spellings. So sometimes when people say short U, they might be talking about the U in put. And then they also might be talking about the schwa, which has two different symbols. And that's in words like fun and such. So that's why long U and short U don't really cover all of the different things that you can do. It can do some other sounds as well. So you might be asking about this U in words like fun or this U in words like put. And those are two different sounds. Neither of them sounds like ah. Ah is usually spelled with letter O, like hot. And so the differences are that the sound has rounded lips and an open jaw and a back tongue. So when I'm saying put, could, book, it's got some rounding, but it's not as round as the oo, like tune. Or if you're talking about the schwa vowel, it's a very relaxed vowel with a mid jaw and no lip rounding and a lax tongue. And that sounds like fun and such. And that's one of the sounds that we were talking about that letter E can also say. So again, that's a great question because the letters can't even really describe the different vowel sounds that we're talking about. I'll show you a quick glimpse of the online resource that I was encouraging you to download. You might find this really helpful. It has the vowel sounds, it has the spelling and letters, and it has the most common words, as well as some contrast words to help you with similar vowel sounds. And so what we were just talking about was the vowel, like in good book, the vowel, like in such fun, and the oo vowel, like in blue shoe. And here's the ah vowel, like in not hot. So I have many videos explaining how to use this chart, how to understand these vowel sounds, and how to use them relative to one another. And you can find all of those on my vowel playlist, which is a great place to start for improving and understanding the vowels. So thank you. That was a great question. We have another question, which is how to say, you're very welcome, how to say acquaintance. So the word acquaintance sounds like acquaintance. So I'm doing a mix of spelling and IPA symbols to help you. So the stress is on the middle syllable quaint, and the first and last syllables are short. So acquaintance. And Americans will often use a stop T in there, but you can say acquaintance with saying the T sound. I would say acquaintance, where because of the NT, I'm not really releasing that T sound, acquaintance. Other things to watch out for. Acquaintance has, again, kind of a stop T in there, so I just say it with an N and an S sound. So it's nice to make your acquaintance, or an acquaintance of mine did that last week. Very good. So that's a challenging word. Thank you for bringing it up. And I think the most important thing is to have a clear quay in the middle, clear vowel, and the short reduced syllables on either end, acquaintance. Faith has a question, which is, oh no, sorry, Fatih, I'm probably saying your name wrong. Please forgive me. How can we find the syllable stress in a word? And so there's a couple of different ways. First of all, on my website, you can look up syllables and find some exercises that teach you for the most common words what the syllable stress is. But the best way is, again, to use the online dictionary resources. I like the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, and they actually show you what the syllable stress is in the dictionary. So, for example, our word between that we were looking at sooner, if I zoom in, I can see that there's a little mark before the syllable tween. And so they put a stress mark that looks like an apostrophe before the stressed syllable. So that tells me that the b is unstressed and the tween is stressed. The challenging thing is to be able to see that and recognize it. Once you get used to it, it is helpful. But I think even better is to listen for stress. So let's listen again.
Between.
We can hear how she goes very quickly on the b, and the tween is longer and has the clear vowel. Between, between. Let's look at a longer word and check it for stress. So we also had the word acquaintance. So we'll look at the syllable stress for acquaintance. So when I'm looking at the word acquaintance, I can see that the stress line is before the queen. And here's my schwas, my sounds at the beginning and at the end. So the first and last syllables are unstressed. They have an unclear vowel, the schwa, and the queen has the clear vowel and the stress symbol. So let's listen.
Acquaintance.
And that one was really clear. I can hear acquaintance, acquaintance, that the queen is long and stressed, and the other two syllables are unstressed. Once you begin to understand syllable stress and start listening for it, these resources will be very helpful for you in finding that out. So yes, good question. There is really no rule for syllable stress. You do just have to learn what the syllable stress is. There are some patterns. So for example, words with ation, like organization, situation, complication, all have the second to last syllable stress, so that A sound. Other than that, it has to do with where the word came from originally. And the other rule that is consistent for syllable stress is nouns and verbs. So if I'm talking about a word that is the same spelling for both the noun and the verb, for example, the word project and project. For the noun, I have a project I'm working on. It's first syllable stress, project, versus for the verb, I need to project that on the screen. It's second syllable stress. And this is something that holds true for many nouns and verbs that have the same spelling. It's not true for all nouns and verbs, but when it's the same word, we have two different pronunciations usually. For example, another example, record. I have no record of that versus record. I'm going to record the video to watch it later. So that is one syllable stress rule and pattern that's helpful. It's a good starting point too for listening and understanding syllable stress. And I have a video called Nouns and Verbs and Syllable Stress in my intonation playlist that you can find. Also on speech modification, I have some lessons about syllable stress and nouns and verbs that you might find helpful. Okay. Hi, Birgit. Nice to see you. I'm so glad everyone could make it to class today. Please feel free to continue to ask questions if you have more. Next week, we'll continue talking about vowel sounds and spelling. Your question about the short U really helped me remember that that's also an important letter to look at. And we also have letter I to look at as well for the vowel letters. And again, I hope that you can join me next week. If you're here in the local area, come to the Bellevue Tech Expo on Wednesday. We're there all day, and we'll have lots of cool things at our booth for you to check out, as well as the expo should be a fun chance to explore the latest in tech here in the Seattle area. We have another question. When there's the sound U after KLR, it is hard for me to say. So the U sound is difficult to say after the K sound, the L sound, or the R sound. So words like lu, rule, cool. I think you're saying that vowel U is difficult. So I would suggest first practicing on other words that have the U, and then determining if it's the vowel that's challenging for you or the consonant sound. Looking at the combinations of sounds, it is useful to know that in certain words and certain combinations of sounds, it's more difficult. I think I'm guessing that maybe going from the K mouth position or the L or R mouth position into that round-lipped oo with the tongue back, oo might be the challenge. So you can try just doing the two sounds and not doing words, and you can see if that makes a difference. So once I start trying to say a word, if I have an accent pattern on it or an error or a difficulty with it, can be hard to overcome it. But when I'm just saying the sounds, sometimes that can help. So I would just try saying coo and lu and ru, and see if you can sequence those sounds, practicing them, getting used to how your mouth needs to move for that, and then moving on to saying those words that you find challenging. Birgit wants to know rhythm and melody while speaking. Yes. So recently, well, not that recently, but I do have a video that I made fairly recently talking about pitch and intonation. And I think that what I've discovered working with people lately, recent clients and recent classes, is that for a lot of people, once they begin to hear some of the overarching patterns of intonation for sentences in American English, they can start to use those patterns more easily themselves. And so one thing I suggest is, trying on some simple sentences to get a pattern where you're staying sort of at a medium pitch and then rising up and falling off. So for example, I would say, try it out. Da, 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 da. I'm really kind of doing what I call a 2-3-1 pattern, where I'm in the middle, I rise up, and I fall off. So it's hot out. I like it. Da, da, da. And as my sentence is longer, I still have that same pattern towards the end. I'm going to meet a friend. I'm going to meet a friend later. Da, 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 da. And so if you can get that rhythm without the words, get the sounds and feel those patterns, you can start to begin to incorporate that more easily into your speech. Intonation, rhythm, and melody is fairly complex. And at the same time, there are some simple patterns that we reuse over and over for the same type of speech that you can begin to incorporate in your own speech. Thank you so much for the great questions today and for being part of class. We will meet again next Friday at the same time, 12 o'clock Seattle time, both here on YouTube and on Facebook. So I hope you can join me in one of those places. If you missed the class live and you're watching the rebroadcast, please feel free to ask questions and make your comments in the comments below, and I will get back to you with answers and resources for those. Fatih is saying that she doesn't have the intonation in Turkish. And many languages actually do have intonation, but we don't really realize what we're doing in our own intonation. In Birgit's language, German, there are some intonation patterns which are fairly similar to American English patterns. And in some ways that makes it easier when speaking English, and in other ways harder because the little differences make more of a difference. But for anybody relating to intonation, being able to listen and imitate and get an ear for it is the first step, and then looking at some of the detailed rules is the second step. Yes, intonation is challenging. Thank you so much for bringing up that topic, and we will have some classes focused more on intonation coming up in the future when we finish our focus on vowel sounds and spelling. So thank you for being a part of class today. I look forward to seeing everyone next week. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you haven't checked out the free resources on speechmodification.com, please do so. Oh, and one last thing to mention for the Facebook viewers, that I do have a new Facebook group where I'm going to be posting lessons and downloadable content. Facebook has a new configuration where we can have social learning groups. So I encourage you to go to Speech Modification on Facebook and check out the group you can join, and then you'll have access to those free lessons and trainings as well. So that's an exciting new development that I encourage you to take part in. Thank you so much for being a part of class, everyone. Oh, we have one more question. I'll go ahead and answer that before I finish, which was, can you mention some words that have the sound W after K, like acquire? Sure. So acquit, acquire. Let's see. So a lot of times when there's a QU, it's actually a KW sound. So even without the A in the beginning, many words like quiet, quote, queer, quiz, they all have qua. That's how we pronounce the QU sounds in English. Great. Okay, so thank you for being here and being a part of class. I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. Speechmodification.com.